Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Uh, it's fortunately not as early as Australia over here, but I'm not usually used to sort of talking too much at this time of the morning, so I've got lots of coffee here to carry on with. Uh, Mare Island is a particular favourite of mine, and disappointingly, it's a place that's very little studied in terms of the mineralogy. There has been a lot of geology done out there, but not many people have worked on the mineralogy. Uh, uh, so where it is, it sits just slightly to the south and east of Auckland in the Bay of Plenty, the little yellow dot here. Uh, Eruptions from Mare Island spread ash basically to the north of Auckland, right down into the Taupo volcanic zone, um, partially to East Cape, but most of the ashfall actually happened where it's presently sea. So I just while I've got the map there, I just wanted to lay out sort of basically where the ashfall went. Um, a rough map of the island. Um, I should point out that this diagram here, or this schematic down here, is actually rotated. That this area down here is actually this area here on the left. You can actually, in your mind, perhaps sort of the two lakes here are the two lakes here. Um, so it's the emergent part of a marine volcano or a submarine volcano. Um, it's about 350 meters high, the emergent part, and it sits in around 400 to 500 meters of water. So it's about 40% of it is above the surface, the other 60% is below. It's a particularly rugged coastline, and you can actually see over here that the predominant weather direction is here to the east, and you can see the embayment that's actually over here. These are mainly very steep cliffs all along this coastline here, because that's where most of the erosion is taking place. Uh, on the western side, it's more sheltered. The mainland of the North Island is over here to the west, so that's protecting it from a lot of the weather. Um, you can see you can probably see it best in the schematic down here, the caldera sitting in there with a couple of little lakes, and there's a prominent fault which it actually runs along there. It's shown as a fairly straight line in this drawing, but it does sort of move around a wee bit. Um, and yeah, so there aren't a lot of landing spots on the island. The predominant place here is this little bay here, which is called Opo Bay. It's also called Southeast Bay and can also be called Home Bay. And the reason it was called Home Bay is that this area was very famous, well, still is very famous for deep sea game fishing. And Zane Grey, I think, mentioned it in a couple of his books, and lots of people came over here to look for big game or fish for game fish. And in the early days, the boats were pretty primitive, so they actually set up a lodge here in Opo Bay, and they had a dining room, a bar, cabins, all sorts of material. And at the same time, the iwi, who are the sub-tribe of Maori that actually own the island, they ran a small camping ground over here that would take about 100, 120 people during the summer would camp out there. And to the left over here, not shown in this little diagram, was some of the kamatua, the elders of the tribe, actually had homes sitting on the high side up here above the bay, enjoying the view. Um, as I say, because the weather mainly comes in from the east, it can get quite rough in there, but it's the normal landing spot, and you'll see a photo of that later. But if the weather is coming from the southeast, then the ultimate landing spot is Omapu Bay or Western Bay, which is on the other side of this little tongue of lava that flowed down. It's not a particularly good landing spot. It's quite rocky, but there is a bit of sand there, and it serves its purpose. And for the most part, you can actually get into Opo Bay. The third place really of interest is over here, which is Taratimi Bay or Crater Bay. And this is not a particularly nice landing spot, but there are blocks of lava in the water that you can pull a little tin boat alongside and jump onto. And it was quite it's been quite well used over the years because to get into the crater or to look around the island, you would normally come in here, then you'd have to climb up. And the high point over here, the high point is 350 meters up here. So you have to climb 300 meters via trails up here to the rim of the volcano. And then you've got to climb down into the caldera to go for a walk around. So it takes a fair old amount of time. Whereas if the boats would come into Crater Bay, land their guests at the bottom there, and even though the cliff was relatively steep, they actually put pitons into the side of the cliff and a stainless steel rope, and it's called the staircase ladder. And you could pull yourself up, and it was just I don't know, probably about uh, 50, 60 meters, maybe 100 meters up that cliff, and you were actually on the crater rim and you could easily drop down. It was also the lowest part of the crater rim there as well. So you could drop down into the caldera for a walk around quite easily. And there was a big outcrop of obsidian exposed at the top of that rim, which was people would sort of sample that as well. So it was quite good for the fishermen could actually land there and for a couple of hours they could have a quick look around the island. Whereas if they came into Home Bay, to look around the island basically took a whole day. Um, it's towards the waning years of World War II and the war in the Pacific, the Americans actually sent out an engineering team to examine the possibility of actually drilling a tunnel through the cliff there and allowing the caldera to flood and turn that into a submarine base. But the tide of war turned about that time, so the idea never actually went anywhere, fortunately. Um, Down here on this one, sort of collecting spots in Opo Bay. This is probably the most productive one on the southern arm of Opo Bay. It's quite rocky around here. It's underlain by some lava flows and some pyroclastic material. Um, and you're not sort of, if you're breaking rocks, you're not interrupting tourists or anything else who are actually landing on the sort of sandy area, if you like, at the end of the bay. I'll talk more about these places as we go, but Omapu Bay on the other side, it's just a 5 minute walk over that lava flow to Omapu Bay. It's not a particularly good collecting spot, but there is a lot of massive tuhualite bands out there. So uh, every time I've been out there, I've usually gone across there and broken off bits and pieces of that for the university. It was nice to keep a good stock there for making thin sections showing tuhualite. Uh, the crystals, tuhualite crystals, are probably easiest found in this collecting spot down here on the western arm of Opo Bay. On the eastern side of Opo Bay are predominant obsidian bands, and probably the best exposure of the obsidian nearby is just on the outside here. There are cliffs of obsidian, and there's, as I say, there's obsidian above here. But there's obsidian all over the island. You could land at virtually any of these places, and assuming you can get ashore, then you will find something. The walking tracks mainly concentrate on the inner part of the island. There is Tuhualite was also found at Ruru Pass, which I think is just up here somewhere, where they were climbing down into the crater and managed to come across some nice Tuhualite crystals there. Uh, this was the only walking track that actually goes around the outside of the island. It goes across to Honeymoon Bay, but most of it is actually inland through scrub, and you can't actually get down to the waterfront where exposed rocks are. Right. So just showing you, this is land at Opo Bay. This is the collecting area just over here behind the boat. And you can actually see here with the boat, this trip was, I should say that this talk was a combined effort uh, by some Australian collectors and myself. And most of these locality photos were either Judy Rose or uh, uh, Michael Hurst and Volker Hoppe. Um, all of the mineral photographs are mine. But you can actually see here that somebody standing there, the normal method, there's no wharf there. The boat would just nose in and it shelves very steeply inside the bay. And they just nose up until it grounds into the edge, put a ladder over the front. And sometimes they would put a plank on the bottom rung of the ladder so you didn't get feet wet. On this occasion, we didn't get the plank. But if this guy here actually went out to where the bow of the boat was, he'd probably be up to his waist. So it gets deep very fast, and this is one of the shallowest places around the island. Most of them they drop to greater depths very quickly at the edges, as you'd expect with a volcano like this. Um, it's quite a So it's called a beach. It's not really sand. It's fine gravel beach. It's more like an English beach, if you like, than a normal New Zealand beach. But the sand is actually I've lost my sample of sand from there, but it is very interesting because it's a various array of minerals right throughout it. Teratimi Bay or Crater Bay. You can see here as people have actually landed on a flat lump of lava. It's quite eroded. It's quite steep here. The ladder is not in any of the photographs, but they are quite steep bluffs. I should mention that the ladder's now been taken down um, because the local iwi who live round in Opo Bay have no way of controlling who's coming onto the island here and what they're doing. And obsidian collecting has been banned out there since the late 1980s, perhaps 1990. And as I say, there is a big prominent band of obsidian at the top of this cliff that was quite often attacked by visitors. It can get a bit rough there, especially for landing. This particular occasion, Neville Burkhan fell in the water with all his camera gear and everything, but he did get some tuhualite, so he was still happy. Um, all of these rocks around here, this area is particularly good. There is some bedded lava flows, but there's this bit up here you can see is pyroclastic material, and so on the beaches is just a wide range of lava from all over the island. The emergent part of the dome is about 4 kilometers in diameter, and it's seen as a compound peralkaline lava shield. last active around 500 to 1,000 years ago, which were mainly a couple of small lava flows. The last significant eruption was probably 7,000 years ago, which is where I showed you the ashfall around the North Island. Probably started, or the oldest activity was around 50,000 years ago, and has had probably at least seven major eruptions in that time, which is where ash reached the mainland. Um, from a mineralogy point of view, we're looking at mainly high temperature gas phase minerals. But as with most rhyolitic type lavas or domes, the as once lava stops coming to the surface, the the magma will continue to give out gas long after the magma keeps coming up. So once the domes actually form, you get these blasts of hot hot gases going through the dome, which can actually cause a lot of alteration and pseudomorphing of the earlier formed minerals. As I said earlier, or as Steve said, type locality for tuhualite, and that was found in about 1932 or 1932, 1935, somewhere around there. Um, and despite a couple of claims from Russia in the late 1990s, early 2000, it wasn't till about 2008, I think, that Kazakhstan positively identified another uh, tuhualite. And since then, it's also been found in Mongolia in 2016, and Pantella, um, Pantelleria Island in Italy, I think, was 2018. They found tuhualite there. Although I believe some, if not all of them, there's some potassium substitution in the formula, which we don't get any potassium in the original type material. It's also well known for a bright pink to red Narsarsuchite crystals, but they're very small. They're about zero point 0.1 of a millimeter, most of them. But they can be quite sharp crystals, and they occur quite extensively in at least three different eruptive sequences. It's also interesting for precious opal. I won't go back to the original map, but to the north of the island, there's always been known to be, there's recorded hot water vents in the deep water to the north of the island. But locally, we have told me that they uh, they frequently dive for fish on the outside Omapu Bay. They've turned Opo Bay into a protected area, so when they want seafood, they go out to Omapu Bay for it. And they said there's quite a few hot water flows coming in around that area. And it's also an area where I found precious opal on the exterior of rocks in the sand at the beach there. And it wouldn't surprise me if there's actually hot water flows coming from the central part of the island somewhere and going out through that beach to sea and depositing precious opal to this day. It is poorly explored for mineral specimens, and like any peralkaline volcano, it's got a high potential for discovery of new minerals. And when our last official collecting trip was in 2001, and that was special permission given by the Trust Board members uh, to go out and try and find if there was any new minerals out there. By that stage, they had closed down the collecting of obsidian. They had never been asked for permission for anyone to collect minerals there before. Nobody had officially asked. It had been collected there for many years, but they did give us approval to go out, but they made it quite clear that this could well be the last trip, and that was the last officially sanctioned trip to the island for collecting. They still do allow scientific research out there. A number of Auckland students, I think there's a couple working out there at the moment on various things. So they still allow research. As an aside to that, we also have a number of other alkaline and peralkaline rhyolite domes in Northland. This is the Bay of Islands here, and Kerry Kerry just up here. So all of these little flags here represent either alkaline or peralkaline rhyolite domes. The unfortunate thing is the age of them is such, and hydrothermal alteration has come through, and most of them are just clays now. And in fact, the areas around here are probably one of the best china clay resources in the world. There's, I think, something like 4 or 6 mines up there, and all of that is being exported directly to Japan for fine china. It's very low manganese and iron within the clay, which gives them a particularly white. And there are halloysite deposits quite prominently down this way as well. I sort of just sort of note peralkaline rocks, particularly noted for rare earths, including especially titanium. So that gives us the possibility of new minerals. Looking from the top, you can see Black Lake here. The other lake is actually hidden. In Taratimi Bay, you can see this is the top of the caldera or the crater wall. And Taratimi Bay, Crater Bay, you can see how it dips down there. And it actually goes up quite steeply, and it goes up to about 315, 320 meters over here. And there was quite a large fortified village or Maori pa that was on there in pre-European days. It was successfully defended. It was obviously Tuhua or obsidian to Maori was very important as a cutting and for tools. It wasn't necessarily used as a weapon. It was mainly used for making tools, whereas North, Central, and South American tribes used it not only as a cutting instrument or digging instrument, but they also used it in their weapons as well. Maori didn't tend to do that. I wouldn't say they didn't use it at all, but it was more a cutting. You will find, and it was traded right throughout New Zealand. We find artifacts all over the place coming from here, which is one of about 18 obsidian sites that held large or quantities of obsidian that was suitable for cutting instruments. This is the Green Lake here. It's quite overgrown by trees. It's quite an attractive spot. It's hard to find obsidian outcrops that haven't been completely destroyed. Even pre-European, of course, there was massive mining going on by Maori, but as boats became more common and people have been out there, lots of people have collected obsidian. You can, if you look up Jeff Rankin in Auckland, a sculptor, he does a lot of carvings and or sculptures in obsidian, and much of that was originally sourced pre-1990 from Mare Island. You can find blocks of it everywhere, and you can see here that that's one of the large east wing hammers, but these boulders are quite large, and many boulders this size were actually pulled off the island and taken as decorative stones for backyards, etc. More often, the collecting was done on little dikes like this, where it actually fractured into at least sort of double fist-sized pieces that can be carried easily. I struggled to actually find anywhere where I could get a decent photograph of an untouched resource. And you can see here there has been some digging going on around there. As far as the obsidian goes, you can see here it's a nice jet black. Uh, it fractures very easily and gives you an extremely sharp fracture. So uh, beaches all round New Zealand will, if you look hard enough, you'll find little flakes of obsidian there. Doesn't mean that it was found there. It was actually transported there and in blocks, and they would be sitting at the back of the beach. And when the fishing canoes came in, the women of the tribe would just take off flakes of obsidian and use that for defleshing all the fish before they took it off to the villages. And when they were blunt, they just threw them on the beach. So it's everywhere. This here is also exactly the same, but what I've done is manipulate the light to actually show that some of the obsidian, not all, it's a small percentage, is actually silver sheen obsidian, and this is just showing off the silver sheen of the obsidian. We don't tend to find gold or rainbow out there, but I will mention something about rainbow. This is the green obsidian from there. It's a greenish black, if you like, but it is technically green. This here again is a bit of green as well, and down here is probably the greenest bit I found, and this is uh, from I think it was Opo Bay, and it's just a small inclusion of obsidian in an azurine rich rock, but it is extremely green, that one. One other, there is some grey, but it's very rare. I don't know. I've seen so-called mahogany obsidian from the island. I've never seen it in situ, and I've never really found anyone that I believed collected mahogany obsidian on the island. People have got it, but they've usually been given it by somebody else and said it came from Mare Island. And in most cases, if you had a piece of obsidian in New Zealand, your first guess would be it came from Mare Island, which is the predominant supplier. But of particular interest is a number of papers have actually talked about blue obsidian from out there. I've never seen it, I've never found it, but when we look at this bit here, and this photo is actually rotated, it's this little spot here. You can see how green the obsidian here is in close up, and there's just an alteration skin on it that's blue. And I wonder if that's where, if you had that alteration covering the whole piece, then perhaps that's what they were calling the blue obsidian. I'm open to seeing better examples, but that's as close as I've ever got. Um, an unusual one. I found this on my first trip to Mare Island, which was probably 1980s. Uh, and it's a toffee coloured or yellow obsidian. It does, in actual fact, on fractured surfaces, if you rotate it, and I've never managed to actually photograph it, but it does actually show a rainbow sheen very, very similar to what you see when you have a light coating of oil floating on water. You just get that rainbow effect. And some of the fracture planes will show this rainbow effect. When you look up close at this, this will not take a decent polish. When you look up close, you find that the whole of this is predominantly air bubbles. The so which means it's impossible to get a high polish. Uh, but it doesn't feel that much lighter than the other obsidian, but it must be because it's predominantly air bubbles in there, which would presumably be causing this. You can see you get blackish sort of inclusions within the toffee. Um, but again, as I say, I found that to the east on the western side of Opo Bay, just a small section, and I've never seen it since, or never found any since, and I've never seen any in any other collection either. The caldera, you can see here, this is looking at the fault scarp and the caldera wall behind it. Um, Getting in and out, fortunately, there's a lot of jumble of large blocks of rhyolite, but metal ladders have been erected in places and ropes or stainless steel ropes have been hung around places to hang on to, but it is a bit of a scramble getting in and out of the crater. This is on the west side of Opo Bay, the collecting area. You can see it gets pretty hot out there working on the rock, so a lot of people are sitting here under the Putakawas. Uh, you can see the lava flows going out here, but there is a lot of pyroclastic material as well, and you can actually see in these boulders along the beach, you can see different textures and colors around there. Uh, so there's plenty to look for, and it's quite. I think the obsidian, the sorry, not the obsidian, the tuhualite that Volker actually came across the best rock there, and probably Volker found on this particular trip 80% of all of the tuhualites that were actually found were found by Volker. It was a very productive rock. Um, Teratimi Bay, again, you can see the bedded ash bands and some pyroclastic material and slumps, and the jumble of boulders, and there's plenty of variety here. Uh, all of this pyroclastic material is eroding all the time and falling on the beaches as well. So there's plenty to look for there. Mineral list. It's to my mind, I think it's quite conservative. I believe there is probably a lot more than this, but these are the definite confirmed minerals from out there. Sorry, you go back there. And that's the rest. So first on the list, and probably should be because it's the most predominant mineral you're going to find out there is azurine, and it occurs in various forms. It goes from nice prismatic or bladed type prisms to blocky prisms to thin needles. Uh, uh, this one here is actually a more recent one I found, and it's actually an azurine crystal in pumice, but it was possibly still a bit plastic when it was erupted, and it's actually twisted the azurine crystal. Um, so you find it's just about in every rock you pick up, you'll find some azurine. A lot of these where you'll see this sort of black scale. These photographs were taken in the early 2000s, pre-stacking days, and I really need to go back and rephotograph some of these because they, they're certainly not up to the standard you expect these days. Um, Enigmatite, there's a reasonable amount out there. You do tend to find some incipient alteration to hematite on some of them. That's actually an insect case, I would say there. They're fairly small and usually in these long, thin black needles. This here, we found over the years we found plenty of these, and they were never identified until recently, and they actually are also tuhualites, but late stage gases have actually altered the outside and turned them brown. And when you break these open, they're actually purple inside. And some of them still have patches of purple on the outside. We'll see a photo of that later. But most of us who have been out there, I think everyone collected some of these brown crystals that we didn't know what they were, uh, and came back complaining they hadn't found any tuhualite, whereas in actual fact we had. The tuhualite sometimes is hiding away in a different form. Um, and autoclays is quite common out there. You can see here a quite euhedral crystal. It's quite scratched there from it's actually in a pumice as well. So it's just the tumbling action and bits of quartz hitting it have scratched it up a lot. This one here is very rounded, unscratched. It's certainly a silicious pumice, a silicious um, matrix, but and again azurine everywhere. But it was quite an attractive specimen. This amphibole, really, the photograph doesn't do it justice. They're actually a dark blue transparent needles, but against the white matrix, it's extremely hard. You can see here some of them. You can actually see the transparency and a bit of the color, but they're actually a nice blue color. And that's the only specimen I found. Um, uh, oh, sorry. Yeah, yeah. No, there was actually one more, I think. Augites are fairly common, and also clays there, and some augites. Pretty attractive when you see them like this. They're nice sharp crystals. They've had a bit of heat after they've formed, so you get these nice rainbows sort of formed on them, somewhat like you see often in hematites. Uh, and again, that usually reflects that they've been heated after formation. Biotite is a common primary mineral. Secondary mineral, it is relatively rare. This is probably one of the only ones I've found at the normal localities, from the rocks we'd normally look at. These two here are actually from some material that Evan Chung, one of our club members, he collected this at Crater Bay, Taratimi Bay. Uh, and from what he described, it seems it was a mafic dike that he collected it from. And it is filled with gas bugs that have these beautiful prismatic biotite crystals in there. But when he first showed me it, my interest was less on these euhedral crystals and more on highly reflective small prisms tucked away at the side, which actually turned out to be zircons, primary zircons in there. Uh, and we'll see some photos of other material from this mafic rock as well. But that mafic rock, I think, is one that I'd really love to get back and collect some more of that and have a really good look at it because I'm sure there's some interesting material in there. Cristobalite is not easily recognizable. There's a bit of cristobalite in there. It's probably tritonite up here. We'll look at tritonite later, but there's lots of tritonite, but it's usually massive. I very rarely do you find a single crystal that's worth photographing. Phaolite, again, surprisingly, the Taupo volcanic zone, virtually every gas lug you open will have a phaolite in it. Phaolite is pretty rare out on Mare Island as a crystallized mineral in a bug. Um, it's certainly present in matrix, but as standalone crystals, very rare. And when you do find them, they're pretty cruddy. They're as being an iron mineral or having dominant iron in them, they alter very easily. So they're usually quite an unattractive looking specimen. But this one here is actually from Evan Chunk's mafic dike. And of all things, this is actually inside a void in an orthoclase crystal. We have some really nice prismatic azurite. And this here is a phaolite. I think I found four of these little phaolites. Very, very well formed, nice sharp, translucent. Very rarely, I think I've seen one phaolite in matrix from the Taupo volcanic zone that is actually translucent. Most have had enough alteration to make them completely opaque. Hypocene, again, this is the only specimen I found. I think I broke it up into about four pieces and spread it around a bit, but it's, and I think one piece went for analysis. Ilmenite, not all that common. And you can see here that most of them show that they've been reheated after formation. Again, azurine everywhere. This one here, again, is some ilmenites that were actually formed inside an orthoclase crystal and the mafic dike. Excuse me. Narsarsuchite is quite a sharp crystal there, but again, it's only about 0.1 of a millimeter. There's a couple of crystals there. Again, it's 0.1 of a millimeter. These are slightly different, that these crystals were found in a silicious soup, if you like. And this is probably the base of the pot of soup. And the Narsarsuchite crystals have formed and fallen to the bottom of the soup. I believe this is the bottom because I think it was at the top. If they'd risen to the top of the soup, then there'd be some air bubbles up there, so you would actually see some good crystal faces. But these grew in this quite thick soup that didn't allow for free formation of crystal faces. Over here you can see they grew in voids where they could crystallize well, but these crystallized within a fluid and have dropped to the bottom. And it's quite common like that. Uh, Pat Brown, who actually found these some years ago, and I think he sent them to Reed and Wellington for analysis. He found them in three different environments, which is these are two of them. The third environment I actually haven't found. As I say, opal, common opal is quite common out there, obviously, as with any rhyolite, the um, the magma chamber after eruptions stop. There's usually quite a massive magma chamber still in the ground, which leads to quite a lot of hydrothermal circulation, and of course. Common opal is a byproduct of that, as is precious opal, but you need the right conditions. Both of these are from Opal Bay. Again, you can see half a millimeter, 0.2 of a millimeter, blues and reds. The largest piece I found was probably, or the two largest pieces I found were probably the size of my little fingernail. So it's you're not going to make a fortune out there. Uh, but as I say, I believe there is active formation of opal out there now, and one particular piece that the biggest piece of opal I found on the outside of a small boulder. I put in their curiosity cabinet on the island, which showed some nice. It was a nice piece of red opal, precious opal. But at the other end, it actually transferred into what looked like a banded agate. So it was obviously formed in common opal rather than agate, but it looked for all the world like a banded agate. And it was quite an attractive specimen. About a year or 18 months later, when I was out on another trip out there, everything that was in the curiosity cabinet was missing. So somebody had wanted them more than the people there did, or perhaps they were stolen, sold. I'm not sure. Quartz, as expected with a rhyolite, you don't get too many of the quartzes are usually um, through liquid later liquid flows rather than the gas phases, but you do get these ones down here, especially these. This is a alpha quartz after beta quartz bipyramid. It's a bit hard to see because there's a lot of crud over it and that. And down here you can see the typical beta quartz terminations and the characteristic little tail on them. It's very hard, and they're not that big either. That's probably 0.2 millimeter, but you can get some nice examples of these. Um, these are normal quartz crystals, probably late stage, and again in a trinimite lined hole. This one was quite surprising. I thought it was probably cristobalite, but it actually analyzes as quartz. And it was just one bug that had about four of these incomplete balls that they formed complete spheres, hollow spheres, but they never went to completion. There was each of them actually had a hole in the side, uh, and and there's no real terminations to anything in there. But they are quartz. It's uh, again just in the obviously pseudomorphine something else. What they use pseudomorphine, who knows? But some previously bladed mineral. Sanidine, these little balls here are actually sanidine crystals. And again, I think I'm pretty sure this one was from the mafic dike as well. Titanites are quite common. Most of the ones I found are actually here impaled on these needles, and these needles are a bit of an enigma to me. They've long been talked about as biotite, but I've never actually seen any uh, analysis of these, and I'd like to see one because they just don't quite look right to me, but. Right from my first visit out there, these have always been called biotites. But as I say, I've never seen anything to prove they were biotites. Trinimite, that's again, as I say, they're not particularly nice trinimites out there. Um, these red needles here are altered somethings that have never been identified. They're quite common as well. Tuhualites, these were my two best Tuhualites, and you can see by the things that these were early 2000s. These were photographed. I made unfortunately, in those days, I was mounting all of my specimens on blue tack or U tack or white tack or whatever. And the particular tack I used when I mounted these was one that broke down in storage and released all the oil, all the mineral oil out of them and completely destroyed these. I mean, the specimens still exist. They haven't actually altered the tuhualite or anything, but just all of the matrix is just totally filled with the mineral oil. And I've tried various solvents to try and take it out, but they're not as good as they used to be. And this one here is one that Volker gave me to make up for the disappointment of losing my best specimens. Uh, but they are very attractive. You also, this is another pseudo-cubic one. And this one here, again, this here is actually in an orthoclase crystal. I've outlined the red up here in this little box, but you can see this sort of grayish white color. That's the anorthoclase crystal. And two tuhualite crystals have grown at right angles within there, and there's a massive tuhualite in there as well, and some of this, which again is another analyzed mineral. It's just strange that the inclusions in the anorthoclase out there are quite productive. This one down here was a mystery for a long time, but it's actually a tuhualite as well. It's got a yellow alteration on it. The crystal never, part of the problem with identifying it by form was that it never actually completed crystallization. So there's a couple of hollows in there, but uh, it is, I think these are enigmatites around here, but that's actually a tuhualite as well. And I said that tuhualites are pretty good at hiding themselves, and you can see here, we saw earlier the completely brown ones. Here you've still got the purple faces. It's just the interfacial angles that have turned brown. So the alteration hasn't been as extensive in these ones. Uh, these ones down here, again, are Tuhua-like crystals, but they're covered with globular quartz. Has been deposited all over them. So they look all knobbly and just a pale purple. And they're also, I haven't got any photos here of it, uh, but they're a pale purple, uh, almost fully resorbed crystals, quite common in a lot of the rocks out there. And they may well be tuhualites as well, but what is left is a husk, and nobody's ever managed to come up with any definitive mineral or mineralogy for them. And these were a mystery for a long time. The It's hard to actually see it in a one-dimensional photograph, but these are basically shaped like a discus, and they're pink, transparent, translucent, um, and they ended up being analysed as tuhualite as well. So there's not only purple tuhualite, there's pink tuhualite out there. Um, we come back, we're at the zircons now, and we're back in the mafic dike, and you can see here that you tend, looking into the vugs, you can make out yellow, white, and orangey orangey pink. Uh, you can see here in these are ones that appear as yellow, but you can see they're just little patches of yellow in there. But when you're looking when you're not looking at high magnification, it just gives the whole appearance of yellow. And this one up there would have a sort of pinkish appearance. But when you zoom in, you can see it's just a little, perhaps there's a little bit of hematite or something in there that's just giving it a little bit of color. Again, unusual prismatic biotite there. And again, when we go across to our anorthoclase crystals, this is one of a number in one particular anorthoclase crystal. Nice um, zircon here, but then chains of zircons like this, and there's also in the same vug, there's a bridge that goes right across the vug that is just a chain of small zircons. As I say, these are primary zircons. It'd be nice to know exactly the age of this little mafic dike. And again, inside another anorthoclase crystal, we've got some nice prismatic azurine. But this zircon started off as a small needle. Uh, One grew out at about 30 odd degrees. Uh, and another one, a bigger one, grew up this way. They got a clear tip and frosted um, body. They're not certainly not common. I think this is the only one I've seen like this. But again, it's more material is needed to really get into that one. Uh, these are really the probably the biggest mystery of all, the unknown orange ones. These were actually mentioned in the first discovery of tuhualite, and they weren't able to be analysed at the time. They are in virtually every vug with tuhualite, and there has never been any identification of them. They are quite clear. They show a degree of rounding, whether it's remelting with higher gas flows or whether they actually form in this way. I'm not sure. Uh, but they appear to be primary, but nobody has ever come up with even a particular mineralogy for it. It's, as I say, surprising that nobody has actually done any work on that. Uh, Here, these pale yellow ones, they got beautiful crystal faces. I suspect, looking at them, that these may actually be tuhualites as well, may have been tuhualites. Totally replaced by something else, though. They're pseudomorph, a typical pseudomorph type texture. Again, typical pseudomorph texture. These here have obviously a feldspar form. There's certainly high iron in them, which sort of uh, shouldn't happen with a feldspar. But as I say, the frost that frosty opaque texture. Rough sort of finish to them, rounded edges. Again, I suspect this is something pseudomorphine feldspar crystals. But it's there's been several attempts to try and put an identity to these, and it's never been solved. This one here is a one-off. It was collected in 2001. It's in a pumiceous matrix, and its claim to fame is actually, if you look at the original paper describing tuhualite, this is the crystal drawing of the tuhualite, almost exactly the same form. This is a translucent, pale brown, beer bottle coloured crystal. It's one crystal all by itself, nothing but pumice around it. Uh, belongs to David McDonald. He kindly loaned it to me so I could take a photograph years ago. Uh, it certainly is deserving of another photograph. Um, and possibly really should be a ramen would be great to sort of look at that without destroying it. But uh, I've never heard of anything like it, never seen anything like it before, and there's certainly nothing in any of the literature about anything looking or seeming to look like that. As I say, these red pseudomorphs, red the Asurine is unaltered, but these are I think probably a pyroxene originally. It's a bit hard to tell, but again, they're typical pseudomorph. Um, Little balls. Uh, I don't know that any analysis has been done. If I had to hazard a guess, I'd probably say they're just weird hematites, but hematite is not that common out there. Um, so what's the present status? Uh, the the island. uh, I said about the deep game fishing club out there. They maintained their resort out there for many years, but once we get to the 1970s, 1980s, uh, deep sea fishing boats evolved from fairly basic things to more luxury type yachts or launches. And so there wasn't so much of a need for people to have a shore base to actually go and sleep and in some comfort and a bar and restaurant and everything. And again, people were paying a lot of money, and if you take them out in your boat, it's better to keep them on your boat and sell them things rather than hand them over to somebody else to gather some money. Um, of course, as these boats evolved, less and less people started to use the bar and accommodation, so it became unviable to maintain staff out there and the thing. So the whole lease was given up and guardianship was given back to the Maori iwi, which is a name for a sub-tribe. Um, and they work in cooperation with Department of Conservation to conserve the island as a reserve with some. It doesn't have the normal controls that a dockland would have, but similar controls. But they do allow people to go out there and stay on the island, camp there, and visit regularly. Um, and Department of Conservation actually pays for some of the iwi to maintain the island, which is quite good, and it is being looked after quite well now. Um, Collecting, as I say, is now prohibited out there. The obsidian is seen as taonga or treasure, and that went in the late 1980s, 1990s, early 1990s. And at the time we asked for the last visit there, they basically after that visit they decided that they should sort of close it to collectors as well, just to be on the safe side. Um, uh, it's relatively easy to get out there. There is accommodation out there, but it's fairly basic, and you have to take everything. There is water supplies on the island, but for a number of years they had to close it down because they were destroyed by pigs that were out there. The pigs have now been removed, so the water supply is back and running. It's best visited as a day trip, and various East Coast or Bay of Plenty ports uh, have launches that will run you out there to the island. Uh, yeah, and I think, yeah, okay. Questions?
Wow.
Excellent, Rod. Very good.
Yeah, nice.
Um,
Mm.
I just had one about when you were showing the titanite pictures. Uh,
Mm.
are the needles, the orange needles look like the augite from Henderson's quarry. Is that a possibility?
No, they're actually uh, they're in a pumiceous material, and they are just scattered by the thousand. They're not sort of they're all through this. When you break the pumice open, there's just needles. It's like a porcupine, um, and they're actually probably not coming through on the in the photographs and the presentation as such, but they are actually a red color. Uh,
Right.
um, yeah, as I say, I'm not saying they aren't biotite, but
No,
if they are, they're a
or,
strange sort of biotite.
all right, yeah. No, I was saying augite.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. The augites out there are quite black,
All right. Yeah,
um, and usually quite well formed. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Rod, I believe, if I think I'm right, in that there has been some tuhualite found in ejector blocks on the mainland.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I should actually. I when I said about it is for nearly 80 years or so, 80, 90 years. It was the only locality. It was the only source of obsidian. It wasn't the only locality because obsidian is sorry, not obsidian. Tuhualite is found in ocean cores from all around the island and from ash deposits around the mainland.
Right.
So, uh, yeah, so you have to be careful to say this is the source of the Tuhualite, but localities for Tuhualite could be there could be 100 different localities in New Zealand, which would be every drill core that's ever been put down. But they are very small.
Yeah. No, it's just if you can't get to Mare Island to collect, there is a chance you can find tuhualite elsewhere anyway. So
Yeah, uh, I mean, they're still the interesting thing is that the first Tehullites that were actually described were actually, I think, the Tehullite that was first described and sketched, I think, was the size of a thumb, of a man's thumb.
wow.
Wow.
And nobody has seen anything to that size. In fact, that unknown amber one that David McDonald found is probably the biggest crystal of any sort found out in the island. Uh, so yeah, and the original discovery, it didn't actually say where exactly which of the three or four localities they were found in. It doesn't say where this big one was actually found, but I suspect it might have been up in Ruru Pass, where you have sort of some more massive lava flows up there, closer to the source, and perhaps more time to grow there. Yeah.
One other question too, still on tuhualite, which you may or may not be able to answer. Why is it like common in that area, common,
Yeah.
but rare worldwide?
I don't know. As I say, the I can I can walk. I can land at Opo Bay, and I can get you a piece of Tehurlite in probably 10 minutes. no problem at all. But it'll be a massive band of obsidian, a purple band running through a rock. And yet there's, I really don't know. And as I say, the other thing too is that the other tuhualites that have actually been found are actually have a certain amount of potassium in them, which is no potassium in the New Zealand one. And yeah, but also on that line as well is that when you look at the other tuhualite localities, there is a number of other particularly rare minerals associated with the tuhualite. Very unusual mineralogy. So why aren't we why haven't we got not just tuhualite but 3 or 4 sort of associates there? And as I say, the yellow one has never been identified.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry, Jim.
I said, it looks like you do have some other rare minerals there that you just haven't figured out yet.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That it's the problem in New Zealand, I suppose, and it's becoming more and more apparent all around the world, is that universities and government organisations aren't prepared or are no longer prepared to sort of put money into mineralogy or fields of geology that don't actually sort of bring money back to them. It's going out and finding an obscure mineral on Mare Island is not going to increase the economic value or be of any real economic benefit to New Zealand. And even bringing collectors over to collect rare minerals is not going to bring in a lot of money. So everything is driven these days by the golden dollar. So
yeah, economy. Yeah.
Yep. And we still have a few mineralogists here in New Zealand, but none of them are actually actively and exclusively teaching mineralogy. They're required to teach anything but mineralogy. And I doubt even students these days do too much in the way of mineralogy.
All right, any other questions for Rod? No? Excellent talk, Rod. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I should say
good.
too that I sort of threw in the bit about obsidian just in the last day or two because I don't normally I talk about obsidian as a separate subject because it's a whole different thing again. But I thought it was important to put some in there, and there is some wonderful Maori legends about the origins of obsidian and its relationship to greenstone in New Zealand or Panamu, and it's yeah. So yeah,
No, it's very much appreciated.
Very good.
Yep.
Can I just ask everybody to say thank you to Rod?
Yeah.
Thank you, Rod.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Very good.
Excellent.
Yep.
talk.
Nice.
No problem.
Thank you. Great show. Thank you.
Yep.
And
Very good.
we will be back again in February. So have a safe Christmas period, a good New Year,
Yes.
and we'll see you next year.
Take care, everyone.
Okay.
All right.
Take care.
Cheers.
Merry
Thanks
Bye.
again, Rod.
Yeah.
Merry
Bye.
Christmas, everyone.
Yep. Merry Christmas.
Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas.